Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, dangerous liaisons. The relationship between Shell and the Nigerian government's likely to be put under scrutiny once more. The oil giant's facing a civil case in the Dutch courts brought by the widows of the Ogoni 9, executed in 1995. Also, 3 NGOs file a lawsuit against French bank BNP Paribas, accusing it of complicity in the 1994 genocide of the Tutsi minority in Rwanda. And 4 years after the presidential election many hoped would bring the country out of economic turmoil, Madagascar's still got one of the highest rates of poverty in the world. Although there have been some improvements, corruption continues to hold back progress. But first, the widows of 4 Nigerians executed in 1995 are launching a civil action in the Netherlands against oil giant Shell. They accuse it of complicity in their husband's death. The men were amongst a group known as the Ogoni 9, officially hanged for murder, although it's widely believed they were targeted by the military government of the time because of their involvement in protests against environmental damage caused by Shell's Nigerian subsidiary. While Shell's denied the allegation, Joe Westbury from Amnesty International tells us more.
Esther Kjobel has battled for more than 20 years for justice for the arrest, unfair trial and execution of her husband. So for her, yes, a big part of it is about getting an apology from Shell and getting justice for what happened to her and her husband. But it is about more than that. It's also about David versus Goliath battle between one woman and corporate giant. And in so many of these cases, the companies are able to dodge accountability even for very serious abuses overseas.
And why do you believe that Shell was so deeply involved in what happened to Esther's husband and the rest of the Ogoni 9?
Shell had a very close relationship with the Nigerian military government during that period in the 1990s. And Amnesty International has seen internal Shell documents, emails, memos, which show beyond doubt that it knew full well that the military was involved in very serious abuses and that there was a risk of even more gross violations of human rights. And yet it still urged the government to deal with environmental protests. It requested the support of the military to protect its operations, knowing full well where that might lead. And the end result was tragically the execution of the 9 men, including Esther Kjobel's husband and the husbands of the other widows in this case.
But Shell claims that it actually offered to help. Is that something that you're not convinced by?
Unfortunately, Shell's claim for appealing for clemency for the men doesn't add up. It came far too late after the convictions had already been given, and after it had already had numerous high-level meetings with the military ruler in Nigeria, where there is no evidence that it asked for any kind of respite from the government in its campaign, its crackdown against the Ogonis and its arrest and detention of those men. Far from it, Shell knew full well, even before the conviction, that the men would be found guilty. And it, at the time, was more interested in trying to stop the protests which were hindering its operations in the region.
Well, 1995, when the Ogoni 9 were executed, isn't that long ago. Do you believe that the nature of the relationship between oil giants like Shell and the Nigerian government has evolved since then?
Certainly, we have a very different situation in Nigeria now than we had back then. It's no longer a military government, but to this day, Shell has a lot of power in the country. It maintains a very close relationship with the government. WikiLeaks revelations that came out a few years ago showed that Shell had seconded its staff to every relevant ministry in Nigeria, and it still wields that influence in relation to the situation which is there on the ground in the Niger Delta today, a situation of ongoing massive environmental pollution, hundreds of oil spills every year, which Shell fails to clean up properly, and is able to avoid any kind of accountability. The government does very little to properly regulate the company and prevent it from causing this pollution, which has such a devastating impact on people's lives in the region.
Joe Westby there from Amnesty International. Well, 3 rights groups have filed a lawsuit accusing France's biggest bank of complicity in Rwanda's 1994 genocide. BNP Paribas allegedly helped authorities purchase weapons used in the slaughter of more than 800,000 people.
Did a French bank help Rwanda get around a UN embargo in 1994 to purchase weaponry then used in the genocide against the nation's Tutsis? That's the basis of a new lawsuit from one of 3 French NGOs, including accusations of complicity in the genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity.
According to what we know from the inquiry's reports and other banks who may have been solicited by the Rwandan government, which froze funds so as to not risk breaking the embargo, it all shows us that BNP must have known where the money would be going and so must have known it would be helping in the genocide by carrying out the transfer.
The Banque Nationale de Paris merged with Paribas in 2000 to become today's French banking entity. However, the $1.3 million transfer dates back to the summer of 1994. The NGOs allege a Hutu colonel currently serving a 35-year sentence for crimes against humanity agreed to purchase 80 tons of weaponry from South African arms dealer Petrus Willem Ehlers that June. BNP would then have acted as the middleman, transferring the funding from the Rwandan central bank to the arms dealer's Swiss account. The arms were then delivered to Rwanda through a border city in the neighbouring Democratic Republic of Congo. Elsewhere, though, there have been claims the trail stretches even higher. A French journalist told France 24 of classified documents showing that Paris itself ordered the rearming of Hutu fighters during the conflict.
The idea was that if an allied government fell, all the other ones were also at risk, which explains this loyalty to the Rwandan authorities in the early 90s, during the genocide when Hutu extremists were in charge, and even after. It's not the French army that's involved, it's the government, the very heart of the French nation.
Up until 1994, Rwanda had strong ties with France. It was only under its current president, Paul Kagame, that the African nation has turned towards both the US and the UK.
4 years after the presidential election, many hoped would bring the country out of political and economic turmoil, and Madagascar still has the highest rate of poverty in the world. There have been some improvements, but corruption continues to hold back progress. Our correspondent sent us this report.
In the enormous slum right in the center of the capital, plastic bottles, empty aerosol cans and pots of used varnish are all on sale or recycled. 55-year-old Nina earns €1 a day selling piggy banks he makes from old tin cans.
Sometimes I eat, sometimes I don't eat. I have to support myself. When I don't have enough money, I just accept it.
20-year-old Narendra sells old bottles. On a good day, she barely makes €1.
The Malagasy are really struggling. The state doesn't worry about the little people. For example, we should receive aid, but we don't. They don't give it to us. They keep it.
Rice bags cover the rooftops of the wooden, makeshift homes known as bag houses.
We want the government to come to our neighborhood. There are pregnant women here, women that give birth here. People are fighting for better lives, and others are fighting illnesses.
Corruption plagues government institutions and is the biggest hurdle to development.
There are old bribery habits. or the tendency to want to take advantage of every contract, even small contracts. The supply of school notebooks is a contract that's always seen as juicy, and everyone will get a little share, and therefore donors are being extremely vigilant.
After 4 years of political crisis and 50 years of economic freefall, the new government is struggling to rebuild the nation.
Well, finally, South African athlete Wade van Niekerk broke the 300-metre world record and rubbed athletics legend Michael Johnson out of the record books for the second time in less than a year. The 24-year-old, who beat Johnson's 400-metre best at last summer's Rio Olympics, recorded a time of 30.81 seconds in the 300 metres at the Ostrava Golden Spike meeting in the Czech Republic. So big congratulations there from Eye on Africa. That is, though, where I'm going to have to end it for the show. Thanks very much for joining us. Do so again. Take care.